Pokemon Let's Go is really good. I think it's amazing that we finally got a fully fledged Pokemon game on a console that technically isn't betraying the Pocket part of the Pocket Monsters name that Nintendo has been so faithful to. The game is essentially a remake of Pokemon Yellow, with the Pikachu and Eevee editions having the same version exclusives as the original Red and Blue. Let's just hope that Game Freak doesn't keep this naming trend going with titles like Pokemon Let's Go, Gligar, and Delibird. I had no expectations going into the Eevee version, since I knew it was a remake of Yellow with obvious graphical and gameplay alterations, but after hearing Junichi Masuda himself trying to warn people that it's a game geared towards younger audiences, I didn't expect anything beyond a very basic remake. I saw the Pokemon Go catching mechanics, rolled my eyes, and assumed it would be a game where all you do is catch Pokemon and nothing else. As it turned out, I would mostly be right. Now don't get it twisted, this isn't just some casual affair. It's a fully fledged Pokemon game, with IVs and stats and shinies and everything. But despite that, it's also the least Pokemon that a main series Pokemon game has ever been. It's clearly meant to be played lightheartedly, and when it is, it's an amazing time. But the longer you stare, the more the cracks are revealed. Random encounters being eliminated in favor of enemies spawning on the map a la traditional Final Fantasy games versus the newer ones which have you seeing your enemies before you engage them is a natural evolution of what players have become accustomed to over the years. And it was a really nice break from the typical random encounters that have existed in every other Pokemon series installation. Instead of running circles around the tall grass until I found the Pokemon I was looking for, I was free to just stand there until I heard a rare Pokemon cry out, making areas like Viridian Forest feel more bustling and alive than ever before. And while I didn't encounter a single shiny in my entire playthrough, even after getting a 100 combo chain with the shiny charm, it's cool to know that you can visibly see them before you engage them in battle. The combat only exists during trainer fights, but it's all there. Elemental weaknesses, dual typing, stalling tactics, you name it. The only real things to be taken away were passive abilities, which while they weren't originally in the Game Boy games, they were added in the Game Boy Advance remakes Fire Red and Leaf Green, and included again in Heart Gold and Soul Silver, so I'm a little torn on whether this was a necessary change. When it was coming out, I had heard some moaning on Twitter about Game Freak making a game for kids. Throughout my entire playthrough, I was enjoying myself thoroughly, and I didn't understand why they were complaining until I beat the game, at which point I quickly understood why people were concerned. Although the review bombing and overall hysteria surrounding the game reminds me why being a Nintendo fanboy is synonymous with social leprosy. I got a decent bit of flack for my Pokemon Go video, so I want to clarify before I get into anything that I do still play Pokemon Go, albeit without any passion or excitement. It's very similar to how I felt when I used to regularly play Final Fantasy XIV, in which I would log in, do some daily quests, and then log off to play something that actually felt fresh and engaging. Remember, the loudest critics tend to be the most passionate believers, but if you're like the general comments section on my Evil Within video, who feels the need to open your criticism with how you hate me for disagreeing with you on the quality of a video game,
grab my penis, little bitch.
As much as I enjoy the game, and trust me when I say there are a lot of great qualities that future Pokemon games can borrow from this title, here's the part where I get critical. If you enjoyed this game or you played it with your younger siblings or kids like this one Kotaku writer did, that's totally fine, and I don't want you to think I'm attempting to invalidate your opinion. I just have to be honest with how I feel about the media I consume. I've had a lot of people get really upset with me when I express analysis mixed with my personal opinion, and think I'm trying to convince other people not to like the same things as me. No one's trying to gatekeep your hobby just because they have a different opinion than you do, and if every time a YouTube personality confidently expresses disapproval at a thing you like, you experience a quarter-life crisis and feel the need to vehemently spew vitriol in their general cyber direction, you might want to step outside for some fresh air and touch a woman in real life so you can be reminded of the things that really matter. The game is largely a retread of what players have seen when they came back to the Kanto region in Heart Gold and Soul Silver, with a lot of the death and morbidity in Lavender Town being toned down, saying things like how Team Rocket has been capturing Marowak for their skulls, as opposed to an NPC in the original Generation 1 game outright saying that they're being killed. The hilarious old voyeur outside of the Celadon gym no longer points out the gym being full of females, but instead how strong they are. To be fair, these were censored in the DS remakes, but it's still a shame that Game Freak and Nintendo think kids are too fragile in this day and age to handle some slightly more mature themes that didn't traumatize me when I experienced them at the impressionable age of 7. You can bring Pokemon out of their Pokeballs to walk around behind you, and certain types can help you traverse water or fly over obstacles once you complete the game fully, at which point you can finish filling up your Pokedex to obtain a shiny rod, with which to increase your odds of encountering shiny Pokemon. With all of that mentioned, aside from battling your friends, that's the extent of the endgame. I think Game Freak realized the game would be incredibly vacuous without more post-game content, so instead of allowing the player to invest time in breeding or something more meaningful and unheard of, like adding the Johto region in a surprise twist, they decided the best course of action would be to ham-fistedly toss in 152 NPCs called Master Trainers, all of whom have a level 80 Pokemon for you to fight in a mirror match. On paper it seems cool, since it gives players the opportunity to train up their team to face off against a prodigy who claims to have the best Pokemon of that region. But massive problems arise once you look at the specific mechanics the game puts in place, which I'll touch on a little bit later. I was under the impression that the game was going to consist entirely of catching wild Pokemon and very little else, judging from the trailers I barely paid attention to before the game's release. So the fact that they allowed you to have a full party of 6 Pokemon that level up, evolve, and learn new moves as well as a move reminder NPC was honestly way more than I expected from what I thought this casual little kids game was going to be. As mentioned earlier, the removal of held items and passive abilities like Sturdy or Flame Body pretty much ensures the battles will be straightforward and more geared towards a casual audience. But that's kind of confusing when you realize that IVs are a real thing and how they work. The random encounters in this game are, on one hand, kind of fun and lightweight compared to the other Pokemon games, which have you attacking wild Pokemon with your team, utilizing status-inducing moves like Paralyze and Sleep to make the capturing process easier, combined with moves like False Swipe and Mean Look to further simplify the encounter against legendaries. It's admittedly pretty fun to just run into a Pokemon, throw a Pokeball, and bam, he's in your PC box, which is now an item you carry instead of a thing that you need to visit in a Pokemon Center to tediously swap out with your current party. I dislike the fact that you can't partition your Pokemon into organized boxes like you could in literally every other game, but as long as it returns for good in later installations, I can give this one a pass. The main issues I have with this new battle system is the fact that if you're playing it on a TV with the console docked like the majority of players will be doing, you have to use motion controls to catch the Pokemon, which often bounce around the screen in an attempt to introduce what the game might erroneously label as difficulty. I bought the Pokeball Plus controller the day it became available for pre-orders on Amazon because aside from feeling a lot of satisfaction from throwing a physical Pokeball and feeling the vibration and sound effects when I successfully land a catch, I have a fascination with Pokeball replicas that try slightly harder than simply putting a spring and a latch on 2 cheap pieces of plastic. I invested in this high-quality cast iron Pokeball from a company called Pallet Town Exports, but once Nintendo found out somebody was supplying a demand that they were failing to meet, they promptly followed the Nintendo tradition of sending the guy a cease and desist and refusing his offer to make products on behalf of their company as a compromise. I know I'd invest a good bit of money to buy a non-plush version of a Premier Ball among others, but no, Nintendo cares more about trading cards and plastic toys. As a fan who's been consuming 90% of your products for the last 20 years of my life, Nintendo, I'd really appreciate it if you'd make some higher quality memorabilia for those of us who are eager to spend money on lavish cosplay props to display in our homes as conversation pieces. But fuck me, I guess. I forgot what I was talking about. Right, motion controls. The default motion control scheme is bad. It's garbage. The game tries to handhold you throughout the entirety of the game with NPCs giving you little tips and warping you conveniently to wherever you need to go next. But with the wild encounters, it basically says, you figure it out, asshole. Slamming the Joy-Con downward at a 90-degree angle supposedly throws it straight ahead, but your mileage may vary. The only way I got to work was to hold the Joy-Con with my fingertips at the bottom of the controller and slamming it firmly down in a boy motion. But that isn't very useful when you're fighting an enemy that likes drifting left and right. You're taught that you can use the motion controls at an angle to catch moving enemies, but more often than not I'd twist my controller to the left and the Pokeball would go flinging off to the right and vice versa. I tried to throw it to hit an enemy that looked somewhat far away and end up completely overshooting it, and then upon easing up a little bit I'd basically roll the Pokeball along the floor like a bowling ball. Interestingly enough, when I ended up using the Pokeball Plus, my problems almost completely vanished, as I found the gyros in the Pokeball were much more accurate and precise than the Joy-Con, allowing me to throw it at an angle with roughly a 90% success rate, which is still kinda low, but I'll take it to be able to play with a cool albeit overpriced highly scalped controller. You can also circumvent this entire motion control mess by simply undocking the Switch and playing it in handheld mode, at which point the Pokeball flies straight ahead every time, using the Switch's built-in gyro to orient your direction. But I couldn't do that for the majority of my recordings since, you know, you can't capture footage when it's undocked. This could have been resolved entirely by just giving the player the option to use their Pro Controller in a similar way, instead of locking the screen and forcing the player to aim with motion controls, because as it stands, this is the single biggest blemish on an otherwise very pleasant and enjoyable game. The PAL Park replacing the Safari Zone was a bad call, namely because while importing monsters from the mobile game makes completing the Pokédex child's play, it completely scraps what made the Safari Zone so much fun. It felt like an actual safari, in which you gambled with time and resources for a chance to land a rare catch, and it was definitely the most exotic element I've experienced in a Pokemon game to date. I'm not sure why all the remakes keep removing it. And on the topic of stripping features out for younger audiences, I was kind of annoyed that they took out the slot machines in Celadon City to replace them with a variety of unplayable arcade games.
They're gonna remove fucking gambling, but the game is based on Pokemon Go, which is a game on your phone, very accessible, free to download, that's stuffed with microtransactions. That's okay. That's okay, but you can't gamble.
The CP system makes its return from Pokemon Go, but its inclusion is basically meaningless considering levels are still present. The CP goes higher and higher as your Pokemon stats increase, as well as when you give it candy. But aside from the thought of a 6,000 CP Pokemon being unfathomable in the mobile game from which it originates, the main problem with this game lies in how broken everything becomes when you increase your team's stats with said candy. Catching a ton of Zubat will give the player a lot of speed candy, which naturally increases their speed, while catching numerous Geodude will give you candy that increases defense. What has resulted from this is teams that can outbattle much higher level Pokemon just by having beefed up stats, easily being able to tank 3 or 4 super effective attacks, although they did balance this by preventing candy boosted stats from affecting online play. The candies also have to be used one at a time, which takes a long time to use up. I'm not sure who thought this was an improvement over the original vitamins from Gen 1. No, I mean, I'm having a ton of fun right now. The ability to play with your partner Pokemon, more specifically Eevee in my case, was a really nice touch taken largely from X and Y's advent of Pokémon Ami, which had you petting your digital creature and feeding them little cupcakes to raise their affection level, and subsequently help you dodge attacks, land critical hits, and shake off status ailments mid-battle. It's fun how you can actually change your partner's hairstyle by rubbing it with 2 fingers on the touchscreen, and it was a solid idea to once again fix the problem of obstructive HM mules taking up a slot in your party by allowing players the ability to access Cut, Flash, Surf, Fly, and Strength, all from the buddy menu, albeit with weird new names like Chop Down and Light Up. But the main thing I found myself wondering was why they didn't extend this feature to the rest of your party. They didn't even have to make a ton of new assets considering there's around 160 Pokemon in the game, including Alolan forms, as well as Meltan and Melmetal, whereas XY and Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire had well over 500, and those still got animated for Pokémon Ami. The only real way to increase your friendship with the rest of your party is to win battles and let them follow you around and interact with them, meaning unless you've had them in your party for the entire game, you'll likely have to do a good bit of grinding before you can take advantage of their affection bonuses. Also, the motion control problems exist in this subsection as well. When using the Joy-Con, I had no problem petting Eevee, but when I'd use the Pokeball Plus accessory, it would go absolutely crazy. In this particular clip, I'm trying to hold my controller completely still, and it's spazzing the fuck out for some reason. I constantly switch between the Joy-Con when petting Eevee, and then back to the Pokeball Plus when I do anything else. Eevee looked so confused.
Are you on fucking drugs?
The omission of the usual daycare breeding mechanics is a confusing choice, since while Yellow never originally had breeding, it also never had IVs or shinies, but they included that anyway. The only way to breed Pokemon is to get what's known as a catch combo, where you build up a chain of catching the same Pokemon over and over again, with a maximum of 6 IVs being possible only after comboing 31 Pokemon in a row. I actually tried to catch more than 120 Zubat just to find one with the right IVs, and while that was easy enough considering a low-level Pokemon has no chance against a single Great Ball, I had a pretty tough time doing the same thing for Magnemite, which zips around on screen and takes an Ultra Ball combined with a great or excellent throw to guarantee a catch. This issue's significance is deepened when you realize that Pokemon can flee after missing 2 or 3 throws, at which point your combo is broken and you need to start over from scratch, wasting your time and expensive Ultra Balls in the process, especially if you attempt to do all this with the finicky motion controls that can cost you your combo. In other words, just play it in handheld mode unless you really don't care. My other issue is that while you can level up your party solely from catching wild Pokemon, getting combo chains and capturing big and small variations for the extra EXP boosts basically makes trainer battles useless in terms of leveling up. This not only breaks the game by allowing you to grind out an area by just spam catching everything in sight, it also means the game primarily becomes about money and wild Pokemon catching rather than fighting other trainers. Once you finish the main storyline, the only thing left to do is complete the master trainers who, as I mentioned previously, have their Pokemon around level 70 or 80. In order to beat all of them, you need to grind a shit ton just to get up to that level, beating the Elite Four as well as other repeatable trainers like Blue in the Viridian Gym and Green in Cerulean City, in order to afford the money to catch wild Pokemon with which to gain more experience points. The end game therefore becomes about beating NPCs in order to gain money, use that money to buy Ultra Balls, catching Pokemon to build up a catch combo and earn more experience points, lather, rinse, repeat. As opposed to the other games only having you use money when you need to withdraw Pokemon from the daycare in order to breed other types. I originally thought we'd be able to get titles like Blastoise Master, Mewtwo Master, and use them as a means of establishing one's social status during online play, but they literally don't do anything. You don't get a plaque or key item or anything. It's just one of 152 checkboxes to fill. Even Junichi Masuda himself basically admitted that this was padding, saying players can use master trainers to give themselves a challenge if they so choose, but I wouldn't be surprised if getting every title does absolutely nothing. I've never played Pokemon for the story as much as other players, but the continuity in this series has gone completely off the rails. Pokemon Sun and Moon saw the introduction of dimensional wormholes, which serve as a handy tool for the writers to circumvent the set chronology of the series in order to have fun with it. I normally love time travel travel and all the interesting plot caveats that accompany it, but in the case of Pokemon it seems excessive. Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon added a storyline about all the antagonists achieving their goals in their respective games, and that was cool. I can understand spicing up the admittedly plain vanilla story of the first generation with crazy twists and cross-dimensional cameos, but where I personally get a little confused is when you're the one doing all the heavy lifting running Team Rocket out of the Silphco building, when the receptionist remarks on Blue's legendary status, and then at the end of the game you can fight Red, but supposedly you're this game's version of Red. Who did what and in what timeline? Whatever, I'm sure some Pokemon Theory channel will weave together some bullshit answer and make thousands as a result of Game Freak overcomplicating the lore. On the topic of Trace, which is apparently your rival's canon name, I named him Gavin because he was clearly a knockoff Gary, or Blue. No one cares about the canon name, you little man-child. I'm really annoyed with Game Freak's near-constant efforts to water down the rivals and newer games to make them as child-friendly and unintimidating as possible. Gladion was, of course, the best rival we've had in years, and despite all the jokes about how edgy and angsty he is, I loved his backstory, design, battle music, and companion Pokemon Silvally. He was initially hostile, and eventually experienced character development that made him really memorable. Seriously though, that battle theme is so goddamn good. Team Skull was also one of the best antagonists we've had in a while. While all these other games had bad guys trying to destroy the literal world for some sort of religious rebirth, Team Skull just wanted to look cool and gain more turf for the most part. And flash gang signs, I suppose. And I mean, I enjoyed Hugh's overall temperament and intensity despite not being outwardly antagonistic towards the player. Not to mention he looks like a goddamn DBZ character, and that's always a plus. You have rivals like Barry, Bianca, Hao, as well as the semi-rival trio from X and Y being so jovial and trying to inspire you at literally every turn. I can only speak for myself, of course, but I think kids are hardy enough to endure a little bit of taunting from an NPC that they'll eventually overtake. And it'll also teach them the valuable lesson that jealousy, contempt, and spite are ultimately negative motivating traits that will lead to failure. Like, nobody likes a little pussy who complains all the time about the shitty hand they were dealt. Just chin up or shut up. You think you can just be a dick to everyone in the real world and it'll never blow up in your face? You had Blue, who was always outpacing you and taunting you every step of the way, and you had Silver, who wanted to use his Pokemon to crush everyone who ever opposed him, which made more sense once you understood his tragic backstory. After that, we got Wally, a lovable frail kid who looked up to you and ultimately couldn't hold a candle to you in Ruby and Sapphire, but got somewhat redeemed in the 3DS remake where they gave him a really cool theme song and had him approach you just before the Elite Four instead of at the beginning of Victory Road. Brandon and May in Generation 3 and all the rivals and semi-rivals since have been very lackluster, whose only character traits are being positive, chummy goofballs that serve to make you feel loved and encouraged. Needless to say, I miss having an enemy to overcome, and I hope the next main Pokemon game introduces more unethical tryhards to continue teaching young and old players alike that positivity will conquer jealousy and resentment time and time again. The main reason I bought Pokemon Let's Go was to have a first-party Pokemon game to justify buying this admittedly cool piece of Japanese technology, so I was going to have a good time with it no matter what. But the strong sales it's been receiving, as well as having the moving power to sell a substantial amount of Switch units, is making some players worry that Nintendo will bog up their schedule with teams working on child-friendly versions of the older Game Boy titles. I personally don't think Game Freak would be stupid enough to cease production of future hardcore titles in favor of shoveling out profitable kid versions of the normal games, but I do sincerely worry that this game performing well in the market could be a big enough temptation for Game Freak to make more casual games and less hardcore games, combined with the positive press coverage and emotionally charged reviews it's been getting. I don't play Pokemon competitively, but I do enjoy breeding monsters with perfect IVs and natures to play with, knowing that I have a flawless specimen to feed all my cupcakes to. I'd be okay if Game Freak kept making games in the Let's Go vein that remake the older generations in 3D, but I want them to also keep making competent games for older players who enjoy strategy and team building. Of course, I know there's a 2019 Pokemon game coming out that will apparently see a return to form, but even then, I'm not sure what the future holds for everything after that. I'm holding out hope that the future Pokemon games will maintain their identities as deep, engaging RPGs, and not merge too many of the elements with Pokemon Let's Go, but only time will tell. I'd be happy to live in a world where we hardcore man-children get the main series installments we've been getting since 1997, and more simplistic fans can play the newest Let's Go game without getting bothered by competitive mechanics getting stripped in favor of a more lighthearted experience, so I welcome whatever Game Freak throws our way. I just hope they don't forget what made their games great in favor of a more profitable, impressionable audience, because I'd hate to have to hang up my trainer hats in protest. Also, Game Freak, please make a Pokemon waifu dating simulator. Look at Honeypop. You fuckers are missing out on a piece of this degenerate pie.